It was Christmas Eve, and I was just finishing up some last-minute wrapping in my living room. I'd moved into this house a few months ago, so this would be my first Christmas alone. My roommates had gone home for the holidays, leaving me in the quiet, empty house. It wasn't too bad. I kept myself busy, listening to Christmas music while sipping on hot cocoa, and the house felt cozy, despite being so big for just one person. Around 11 p.m., I was just about to head to bed when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping against the window. I froze, setting the wrapping paper down. At first, I thought it was just the wind, maybe a branch scraping against the glass. But then it came again, louder this time. I stood up and moved toward the window, peeking through the curtains. I could see nothing, just the faint glow of the streetlight outside. No one was there. I sighed in relief, telling myself it was nothing more than the wind. Still, something about it unsettled me. I checked the other windows, making sure they were all locked. The last thing I needed was some stray animal trying to get in. I went around the house, checking every door and window again, even though I knew I'd already locked them. Everything seemed fine, but then I heard it again, this time from the front of the house. My heart skipped a beat. I hesitated, staring at the door. Maybe it was a prank, but it didn't feel like a prank. There was something off about it. The sound was deliberate, too controlled. I grabbed my phone and called my best friend, hoping she'd pick up to distract me from the growing anxiety. She didn't answer. I heard nothing but the beep of the phone disconnecting. I called her again, but no response. I shook my head, feeling ridiculous for worrying. I turned off the phone and made my way to the door, pulling the curtains back just enough to peek outside. Nothing, just the darkness of the street and the occasional flicker of a distant light. I breathed a sigh of relief, convincing myself it was just a bird or something. But as I moved away from the window, I saw a shadow dart past the glass, just outside the corner of my eye. I froze. There was someone out there. I could feel it. I quickly checked the locks on the front door again. Double-checked, triple-checked. The last thing I wanted was to have someone break in, especially on Christmas Eve when I was alone. I walked back into the living room and turned off the lights, leaving the room bathed only in the faint glow of the Christmas tree lights. I sat down, trying to calm myself. I even laughed at myself a bit, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But then the tapping came again, this time much louder. I snapped my head toward the window. This time, there was no mistake. Someone was tapping on it. It wasn't the wind. It was someone outside, trying to get my attention. I ran to the phone, dialing 911 as fast as I could. My hands were shaking so much, it took me a few tries to get through. When the dispatcher answered, I tried to keep my voice steady. "There's someone outside my house," I said. "They've been tapping on my window, and I think they're trying to get in." "Ma'am, are you alone?" "Yes." "Stay calm. We'll send an officer right away." "Are the doors and windows locked?" "Yes," I whispered. "I've checked everything, but they're still out there." The dispatcher told me to stay inside, keep the lights off, and not to open the door. I sat in silence, listening to every creak of the house, every whisper of the wind outside. The tapping stopped for a while, and I thought maybe they had left. But then I heard something else, a soft creaking noise, followed by the unmistakable sound of a door handle turning. My stomach dropped. The back door. I hadn't double-checked it. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My eyes darted around the room, trying to think of what to do. I grabbed a kitchen knife, holding it close to my chest like some kind of weak defense. I hid in the corner of my bedroom, holding my breath. The footsteps started, soft but deliberate, moving through the house. I heard them on the stairs first, slow and careful, as though they were trying not to make noise. I clutched the knife tighter, barely able to keep my hands from shaking. The footsteps came closer. I could hear them now, right outside my bedroom door. They paused. For a moment, there was nothing, just the silence of the house. My heart was pounding in my ears. I could hear my breath coming in shallow gasps. I thought I was going to pass out. Then I heard it, soft, raspy breathing, like someone trying not to be heard. But they weren't trying hard enough. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone, and stayed on the line with 911. My voice was barely a whisper. "Please, hurry. They're inside." "Ma'am, we have officers on the way," the dispatcher said, their voice calm but urgent. "Stay on the line, don't hang up. Is there any way for you to lock yourself in a room or barricade the door?" I could hear the footsteps again, closer now. I pressed my back against the bedroom door, clutching the phone tighter. The dispatcher continued to speak, but I could barely hear them over the sound of my own pulse hammering in my ears. The footsteps came even closer, and I heard the unmistakable creak of my bedroom door handle. I held my breath. Then, silence. For what felt like hours, there was nothing but the sound of my ragged breathing and the dispatcher's calm voice on the phone reminding me to stay quiet. My entire body was frozen in terror. Finally, I heard the distant sound of sirens. The footsteps stopped. The door to my room didn't open. The police arrived minutes later, and I rushed out of my bedroom, terrified to face whatever was waiting. They quickly searched the house, and that's when they found him. An ex-convict who'd been stalking me for weeks. They arrested him without a fight. When they searched the house, they found disturbing drawings of me, my face, scribbled in charcoal on scraps of paper. They also found items from my trash and mail, things I hadn't even noticed were missing. But the worst part? On the kitchen table, there was a note written in his handwriting. "I knew you'd be alone this Christmas." I run a small, independent bookstore that's usually quiet during the holidays. It had been a grueling month. Between the constant rush of customers and the never-ending stack of inventory to update, I hadn't had a break since December started. But on Christmas Eve, I decided to close early, sending my staff home so I could finally catch up on some much-needed paperwork. The store was silent when the last of my employees left. I was working in the back office when I noticed the doorbell jingle. I glanced at the clock. Nearly 6 p.m. The shop had been closed for almost an hour. I wasn't expecting anyone. I went to check, wondering if it was a delivery or someone who had forgotten something. As I walked to the front, I saw him, a man I recognized. He had been in the store earlier that day. I hadn't given him much thought then, but now, seeing him again in the dimming light, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was the same man who had been here this afternoon, and even then, he gave off a strange vibe. He wasn't after any books, just wandering around aimlessly. I'd felt uneasy about him then, and now here he was again, an hour after closing. I unlocked the door cautiously and opened it a crack. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral, though I felt a growing unease. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sorry to bother you. I left something here earlier. A bag, I think. Is there any chance you found it?" I didn't remember seeing a bag when I was tidying up after closing, and I certainly didn't recall him carrying one when he was here earlier. Something about the way he asked, the casualness in his voice, didn't sit right with me. "I didn't see any bag," I said, feeling my pulse quicken, "but I'll check in the back just in case." I stepped away and walked to the back room. There was no bag there either. The store was small. If anything had been left, I'd have noticed. I walked back to the front, where he was still standing just outside, his hands still deep in his pockets. "I didn't find anything," I told him, trying to remain calm. "If something turns up, I'll contact you." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then his face shifted slightly, his eyes narrowing. "You sure you don't have it?" he asked, his tone now sharper, almost threatening. "I need it. I need that bag now." My unease grew into a tight knot in my stomach. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice firmer. "I really didn't find it, and I've checked everything. You should just go home." He stepped closer to the door. "I'm not leaving without it." His words were flat, like he was no longer interested in the bag, but in something else entirely. The air around us seemed to thicken with tension. I backed away slightly, ready to call for help, when I heard him speak again, his voice now tinged with something darker. "If you don't let me in, I'm going to make you regret it." A chill ran through me. This wasn't about a lost bag. It never was. I rushed back to the phone and grabbed the receiver, dialing 911, my hands trembling. The man started yanking at the door, pulling hard on the handle, banging his fists against the glass. "Let me in," he screamed. "I'll take it all if I have to." I didn't wait any longer. I turned and ran to the back, looking for any way to escape. But then, just as quickly as it started, the banging stopped. I hesitated, holding my breath, wondering if he had finally given up. But when I looked up, he was gone. Just like that, I stood frozen, my mind racing. What was going on? I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last I'd see of him. I decided to lock up and leave. It was close to 1 a.m. when I finished up, and I just wanted to get home. I grabbed my coat and headed out the back. Noticing the snow had started to fall heavier, my car was parked alone in the lot, the only one left out here. I froze halfway to my car. Fresh footprints cut through the snow, leading directly to my vehicle. But I didn't stop there. My heart dropped as I noticed something else, something horrifying. In the back seat of my car, I saw a faint silhouette. It was him, the man from earlier. He was crouched down, barely visible, watching me. Our eyes locked. I didn't think. I just ran. My footsteps were frantic, my breath sharp and quick, as I sprinted back toward the store. Behind me, I heard the crunch of his footsteps, growing louder. I fumbled with the door lock, finally getting it open just as he reached the threshold. I slammed the door shut and bolted it. He was right outside now, pounding on the glass, shouting threats. "You can't hide from me," he yelled. "I'll get you." I picked up the phone again, dialing the police, my voice shaky as I explained what was happening. The officers arrived quickly and arrested him. Later, I found out that he had been doing this for over a month, luring people in and then robbing them, often leaving them seriously injured or worse. The police had been on the lookout for him. Though he was arrested, I could never shake the fear he had instilled in me. Since that night, I've never stayed late or alone in my own shop again. It's amazing how people like him can scare you away from a place you've always felt safe. And the worst part? The lingering feeling that someone, somewhere, is always watching, waiting for their next move. Christmas Eve had been quiet this year. A dinner with some old friends out in the countryside. Now, I was driving home through an endless stretch of snow-covered farmland. The night felt oppressively still, and the road, flanked by dark fields and barren trees, stretched out like a frozen abyss. The soft hum of my aging sedan was the only sound, comforting in its familiarity. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 11:42 p.m. If I kept going, I'd be home before 1 a.m. That was until the car shuddered. The dashboard lights flickered, and the engine let out a final guttural sputter before dying completely. "Come on." "Not now," I muttered, turning the key. Nothing. I tried again and again, but the engine refused to start. I grabbed my phone, hoping for a miracle. No signal, of course. I was in the middle of nowhere. Sighing, I slipped on my coat and gloves, stepped out into the biting cold, and looked down the road. I remembered passing a farmhouse a mile or so back. Maybe someone there could help me, or at least let me use a phone. The walk was unnervingly quiet. The crunch of snow under my boots sounded deafening in the stillness. The wind hissed through the trees, occasionally whipping snowflakes against my face. It felt like I'd been walking forever when I finally saw the faint outline of the farmhouse. A single porch light glowed weakly against the darkness. I climbed the creaky wooden steps and knocked firmly on the door. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cutting through the silence. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. The door creaked open. "Hello?" I repeated cautiously, stepping inside. A blast of cold air followed me in as I closed the door behind me. The silence inside was worse than the cold. It made my chest feel tight. Dust covered the furniture, cobwebs dangled in the corners, and the faint smell of damp wood filled the air. "Is anyone here?" My voice cracked slightly. I stepped into the kitchen, the only room faintly lit by a weak light above the stove. That's when I saw it. A streak of blood, smeared across the floorboards, led straight out the back door. I felt my stomach churn as panic clawed its way up my throat. I turned to leave, but a sound stopped me dead in my tracks. A creaking floorboard. My eyes darted to the staircase, and my heart nearly stopped. A man stood halfway down the stairs. He wore a heavy coat and a worn hat that shadowed his face, but I could feel his gaze locked on me. He didn't speak. He didn't move. Pure terror flooded my body. I bolted for the door, my boots slipping on the slick floorboards. Behind me, I heard him lunge, the heavy thud of his boots pounding against the wood. I burst outside, gasping for air as the freezing wind bit at my skin. My eyes darted around frantically, looking for anything I could use to defend myself. My gaze landed on a rusted crowbar leaning against the side of the house. Without thinking, I grabbed it, my trembling hands gripping the cold metal like a lifeline. The man stepped onto the porch, his silhouette massive and menacing in the faint glow of the porch light. "Don't come any closer," I shouted, my voice shaking. But he didn't stop. He descended the steps slowly, each crunch of snow beneath his boots echoing like a death knell. When he was close enough, I swung the crowbar with everything I had. The metal connected with his stomach, and he let out a guttural groan, stumbling backward and collapsing into the snow. As he writhed on the ground, clutching his midsection, I noticed something. A faint, jingling sound. My eyes darted to his coat pocket, where I could see the outline of a key ring. Instinct took over. I knelt quickly, yanked the keys free, and sprinted toward the truck, parked just a few yards away. My breath came in sharp gasps as I climbed into the cab, fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life on the first try. Relief washed over me as I gripped the wheel, slammed my foot on the gas, and tore down the icy road. My heart pounded as the farmhouse disappeared into the darkness behind me. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stop. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel, and my breath shook with every exhale. It felt like hours before I saw it. A faint glow ahead. A petrol station. Tears blurred my vision as I pulled into the lot, parking the truck haphazardly. I stumbled inside, my legs barely holding me up. "Help me," I gasped, my voice barely above a whisper. "Please, call the police. There's a man. He tried to kill me. He's back at a farmhouse." The cashier, a middle-aged man who looked as shocked as I felt, didn't hesitate. He grabbed the phone and dialed immediately. Minutes later, the petrol station lit up with flashing blue and red lights. I sat in the corner as the police listened to my story, their faces grim and serious. An hour later, we were back at the farmhouse. I watched from a patrol car as the officers swept through the property. Eventually, a detective approached me. His face was pale and grim. "We found him hiding in a crawl space under the shed. He's in custody now." I exhaled, a shaky breath that barely took the edge off my relief. "But that's not all," the detective continued. "We found several bodies buried in the backyard. He's been doing this for years." The weight of his words hit me like a wave. My chest tightened as I realized just how close I had come to being one of his victims. "You're lucky," the detective said softly. "You did the right thing." I nodded weakly, but my mind kept replaying the moment I saw him on the staircase, his shadow stretching across the wall. I had escaped, but I knew one thing for certain: the nightmare would haunt me for the rest of my life.